things. We think if we descended from someone in the distant past, then we got DNA from them. But that just turns out not to be true.
Because I've watched several of your interviews talking about the difference between genetic Adam and Eve and genealogical Adam and Eve. And I find it extraordinarily fascinating, but admittedly, I still have a hard time wrapping my mind around it, what the difference is there. So maybe you could take a moment to explain to the audience that difference between genetic and genealogical.
Yeah. So genetics, we say someone's a genetic ancestor if we got by direct descent DNA from them. We say they're genealogical ancestor in a more normal, ordinary sense. Just that they're a part of the chain of ancestry that gave rise to us. Like, if we were to get a complete web of who our ancestors were, their name would appear there. That's what we mean. And we tend to conflate these things. We think if we descended from someone in the distant past, then we got DNA from them. But that just turns out not to be true. The vast majority of our ancestors just don't give us any DNA because we got our DNA from other ancestors. And that's a very surprising fact, right? So that means that if Adam and Eve were really recent in the recent past, and the big twist here, which once again is very well grounded in the Genesis tradition, and it's completely consistent with the Genesis text, is that when Adam and Eve left the garden, they encountered people there, and that's where Cain's wife was. That's where Seth and it got his wife, and that's why he was scared of the people out there, and that's who filled the city. All those sorts of things. That's the idea. But they're not the focus of Scripture. Instead, what happened, though, is as there was interbreeding, is very quickly Adam and Eve's lineage spread across the entire globe. And I mean that genealogically, not genetically. So most of our DNA, or all of our DNA, comes from people that were outside the garden. Adam and Eve wouldn't have been special for their DNA. They were special because of this covenantal relationship they had with God, that was, and the consequences of their fall that spread to all of humanity through them. So we all end up being children of the garden and children of the people outside. And that's actually where the trick comes, because when it comes to our DNA, it comes from people outside the garden. And those people God would have created a different way than Adam and Eve. I mean, Adam and Eve could have been created de novo, without parents, out of the dust and out of a rib, and God breathing into these things life. That could have happened just as the young earth creationist understands it. But the people outside the garden, Scripture's silent about them. And, from natural history and the evidence, there just seems to be very good evidence that they shared common ancestry with the great apes. So God had created them, possibly in the image of God, depending on how you want to think about the image of God, by other processes, a providentially governed process of common descent. And so when you look at the evidence of our DNA, we see evidence for common ancestry. And that isn't a problem, because Scripture is not talking about the people outside the garden. It's talking about Adam and Eve. Now, this is actually where something really interesting has happened. I think most people across the conversation, as they understand the distinction between DNA and genealogy and genealogical ancestry, most people, I have yet to really see a person who's demonstrated understanding of the difference and then not switched to saying, well, actually Scripture only does talk about genealogical ancestry. It doesn't talk about genetics. So all we really need is a genealogical Adam and Eve. The whole idea of a genetic Adam and Eve is a very bizarre idea that could only have arisen very, very recently, because we only discovered DNA very, very recently. And so it doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, it's not in Scripture. It's not even in traditional theology. It's just a very recent aberration that just has to do with us being a bit confused about how ancestry works.